All right. Well, I'm super excited to welcome you to this webinar that we have called From Misaligned to Motivated, How to Double Productivity with People. It's a lot of words. There's a lot going on in there. And I really want to show you how some of the experiences that we've had at Salt Collaboratory have come together to achieve these results for our clients, really helping teams move from that misaligned place to being far more motivated about what they're doing. And we'll have a case study to discuss that, but also to look at this very difficult question of productivity and getting our work done in a far better way. So here we are. Welcome, everybody. Just so that you know what we're going to cover, our webinar is about an hour. We're going to try to get through the content so that there's lots of time for questions. But I have asked Susan to keep an eye on the chat. So if you have questions as I'm going through things, just raise your hand or pop something in the chat and we'll definitely try to address it while we're talking. But this is what we're going to do today. We are in good company with leaders, and I want us to just level set on what our lives are like as leaders, what we deal with, what we aspire to, because we are with our own. And I really want us to see how we can learn together and find new ways to help ourselves and our teams. So that's where we're going to start, just level set on who we are and what we're trying to do here. But then I want to spend most of my time talking about this construct that I'm calling PeakForm for good reason, which I view as an unlock for a lot of the challenges that we're seeing. And so we'll delve into that. But we are going to spend a fair amount of time looking at PeakForm in action and how it's actually helping one of Salt Collaboratory's current clients move exactly from that misaligned place to a motivated, coordinated team that is able to do incredible work. And I want to leave you with some tools, some templates, some ways that we can keep thinking and working together. And at the end of it, I'm hoping that you will have seen and heard some different things about how to move through some of the challenges that we all experience. So hopefully you're in the right room, as they say. So for folks who don't know me, I'm Hannah Burson. I have been in the consulting industry for a very long time. I've also been in industry, not working as a consultant in technology and financial services. I've been working as a certified design thinking instructor with people like Heather and others for over 6 years. And about 5 years ago, I decided to pull all of this expertise and experience together into my own company called Salt Collaboratory, where I live, and breathe this work every day. So this is my story and what I'm trying to do to help all of you see new things. And at Salt Collaboratory, we have had the opportunity to work with incredible clients across multiple industries, thanks to technology these days in many countries from Australia to Argentina, across many different projects. And when we think about our work, it ranges depending on what our clients need. So we're either helping clients in a consulting capacity, which is really what PeakForm is about. Some of our other clients are looking to acquire these skills, so we design custom training programs for them. And for other clients who are seasoned leaders who really need something very specific for their work, we transition into a coaching relationship. So we've got lots of flexibility for how we work with our clients. And we have been very fortunate to work with some of the world's biggest companies doing incredibly interesting work, from Winnebago to Heinz, big not the ketchup people, the real estate people. Did some work just a few weeks ago for a Google company. We're working, of course, and we'll hear more about this, with children's hospitals. One of my clients from Schneider Electric, Berkshire, is just joining the call. That was some work in Toronto. I've had an opportunity to talk about my pets with Blue Pearl. So the point here is that this very eclectic mix of companies really only has one thing in common, and that is that all of the leaders who I've worked with in each of these companies are forward-thinking, are looking for new ways to help themselves and their teams do better work. They're open-minded and they're ready for integrating new ways of working into their teams. And that is a universal thing, regardless of industry. So very excited to share some of that experience in our conversation today. When we think about ourselves as leaders, I feel like the illustration in the center of this slide sums it up for me. I'm guessing that all of us are somewhat wired to find that new challenge, to climb that new mountain, to take ourselves and our teams to that next level. And when we look at leaders, mobile leaders who are influencing a lot of our thinking, the messaging is somewhat consistent. Whether it's Sam Walton saying high expectations are the key to everything. We're those types of people. Or leadership is about inspiring people to do things they never thought they could. One of Steve Jobs' many quotes. Or you need to bring people along in order for them to buy into the vision, from Indra, who was running PepsiCo for a long time. We also know that folks like Google, and we'll hear about how Google fits into the OKR story, are about always delivering more than what is expected. And our OKR way of thinking and working is a way that we can really systematize that. And of course, my favorite, because it's where I come from, it always seems impossible until it's done. And I know that what we're doing isn't exactly what he was doing, what Nelson Mandela was doing. But I think that's something that we can think about as well. So I'm just going to pause here and see if there's any heads nodding about the fact that actually we're in the room with people who think like we do about wanting to keep pushing the envelope and to accomplish bigger things for ourselves and our teams. Does that feel like you? Sort of? Yep. Seeing the heads nodding. Fantastic. All right. Good for us. We're very tenacious because when we try to do this work, we are not alone in struggling just a little bit. So these are some studies that have come through recently that are showing that we are not alone when it comes to trying to get this work done. These are some really staggering numbers that were published in a recent article in Fast Company with all the sources there. But 48% of all organizations fail to meet at least half of their strategic targets. Really? Actually, probably if we think about our own organizations, 61% of C-suite executives acknowledge that their firms struggle to bridge the gap between strategy formulation and day-to-day implementation. Thank you for admitting it. And 47% of team members don't know how their leadership is tracking their strategy execution. So something is going on with all of us and all of them and all the other leaders who show up with all the good intention, who still struggle to get this done. And when we think about why that's happening, you can tell me whether any of these resonate with you. This is what teams, thank you, Berkshire, seem to be struggling with. And which is why we get those not so positive numbers about getting our strategies actually executed. A lot of misalignment across teams. Even though there are goals somewhere written down, if you had to ask people individually, what are your goals? What are you trying to achieve? They may be performance related, but in terms of actually getting their organization to the next level, maybe not so much. Innovation that isn't happening. Challenges with execution for a whole host of reasons. And all of that actually almost leads to this low engagement and motivation. Everybody's trying and nobody's getting anywhere. And after a while, we don't really want to play the game anymore. But the other thing that we're seeing a lot of is outdated skill sets. And this point is going to come up a few times. It comes up for me a lot because what I see is that those of us who are leaders are not in our 20s anymore. Some of us are on the call, I know. So good for you for hanging out with all the older people. But some of us have been doing this for a long time and really picking up and acquiring new skills that make a difference for us at this later stage of our career doesn't happen very often because we've done well. We don't really think that we need that many new ways of working. But while we were building our stories, new things came onto the scene, like design thinking, like OKRs that we may have missed. So there is, I feel, something going on around how maybe some of our skills are a little bit outdated. Would anybody add anything to this list, maybe in the chat? What have I missed here around why we aren't getting things done? I'm going to peek a bit in the chat and see if anybody has anything. Or you can +1 on any of these if you see them. Yep. Conflicting priorities, a little bit of misalignment in there too, but that's a big one, not being able to organize ourselves and ladder those priorities up to the right objectives, for sure. If you have anything, keep adding it and we'll take external pressures. Absolutely. Organizational culture. All of these things are blocking us. And frankly, these are complex problems that require more creative solutions. So let's take a look and see how we get there. The person who brought up organizational culture, before we talk about actual solutions, I just want to touch on this one point, which I've seen a lot because a lot of my clients tend to be people who are relatively new in their roles. All of us are struggling with all of this. And anybody on the call sort of 1-2 years into a new role, either a new company or an existing company? Hello, Elise. I think that would be you, even though it's somewhat related to what you were doing before. But when you've got all of those stresses and you're in a new role, then you've got a whole bunch of other stuff going on because you are navigating that organizational politics. You do sometimes inherit teams and you have to understand their dynamics, right? You're coming in with your perspective, but you've inherited somebody else's organization. And to that point about culture, you have to acclimate to this new culture. So that's happening. And at the same time, everybody was super excited when you were interviewed and you came in and so much is going to happen. You've got to set those priorities. You've got to increase productivity, do the whole innovation thing, get quick wins. There's a lot going on. And it's really at times like this that I've seen it, all of those things we've been talking about come to a head because there's so much pressure in these new roles. So when I've been helping clients like that and other clients in similar situations, I've found over the years that I've been reaching for 2 frameworks in particular to help my clients take care of all of those things at the same time. And those 2 frameworks, and we're going to hear a lot about them today, are design thinking, which is all about helping to innovate. And it's essentially a framework for innovation that brings this human-centered creativity, different ways of thinking and working to complex problems. We don't use it if the problem isn't complex. And when the problem is complex, it turns out to be an incredibly powerful way for us to move forward more quickly. So much so that there are statistics and data and studies that show that companies that use design thinking get to market 2 times faster. That's the whole double productivity thing, have higher revenues and much higher returns. So design thinking is rock solid as a way of working that produces very impressive results. Next to it, though, is another one that I want to talk about more and more, which is objectives and key results. And we'll talk about what this is, especially for those of you who are twos in this space. So OKRs provide a clear framework for setting ambitious goals and aligning efforts towards measurable outcomes. So we have 2 sides here. We have all that innovation and alignment and working together in these collaborative and creative ways. Great. But we have right next to it, taking all of that energy and directing it towards ambitious objectives that have very clear markers or very clear results that we can measure our progress against. And for anybody who's, and I don't know how many of you are in tech companies, use these all the time. In fact, OKRs were popularized at Google. Many other companies beyond tech use them as well. And many others are also using the design thinking framework. So all of the organizations that are noted at the bottom of the slide, for them, this is motherhood now. Right? For many other organizations and some clients that I've worked with, brand new. I almost like to think of myself and SALT as bridging the gap between this more recent way of thinking and working to help people who, for whatever reason, haven't come across it yet. And I want to bridge that gap in a way that is efficient and proficient for people. You don't have time to go to courses and to read books and try to internalize it. I want to help people use it in an exact, precise, and productive way. And that's why I rolled them together into this construct or model that I'm calling PeakForm. And PeakForm means something to me, having just done a big hike with my husband in the Pacific Northwest. I didn't have poles and my shoes were too small. And I was fit enough, but the rice cake didn't really touch sides by the time we got to the lake. And I think that a lot of us are doing our work without being in peak form, without really having what we need to do it in the way that makes it easier for us and our teams. So that's what the name is all about. But if you look at what it's trying to do, these words highlighted in blue, they're the polar opposite of what we were seeing on all those barriers. So now we've got action-oriented frameworks that are all about translating aspirations into outcomes. We're going to blend creativity and focused execution. We're going to tackle that strategic alignment and map it together with innovation. And at the end of the day, and we'll see examples of this in the case study, we will make sure that we don't leave anybody behind and that team members feel ownership, feel that they're collaborating, and they have, most importantly, particularly for our next generation, a sense of purpose. And they understand why they're doing what they're doing. So let's see how this all works. Essentially, again, this is from practice rather than theory, what I see happening most often is that there's a flow between these two frameworks, depending on where you are in the story. So often when I start working with clients, when we're trying to untangle all of this, the first point is to align on aspirations. We have to make sure we're heading in the right direction. We're mapping to the strategy. We know what our future state is. We know what our current state is. And design thinking methods are very powerful for that and can get that work done very well, very quickly. A lot of this is about doing productive work with teams in a truncated amount of time because that's all the time we really have. So we do some work around aspirations, and then we know, where we're going and what our current challenges are so that we can start to think about our objectives. When we start thinking about objectives, we're moving from the blue world into the purple world, which is all about OKRs. How do we set those objectives? What does a good objective look like? What's a good key result? How do we map our initiatives? How do we get tactical about setting up those objectives? Great. Now we've done all that work. We're super excited about our objectives, our key results. We're even maybe doing some work to get there. But invariably, if we're doing this, we're not looking to keep doing everything we've been doing up until now in exactly the same way. This is usually brought in where we're looking for change. We're looking for growth or innovation or better alignment. So something is going to need to change. And when we think about how we're going to execute differently, that's when we reach back in step 3 into our design thinking toolkit. Because now we're going to achieve those objectives and key results in a more innovative, more creative, proficient way. And we're only going to focus on the parts of our programs that are weak or missing. So we're going to identify those gaps, the stuff that we've identified as going well, we're going to keep doing. But we probably are missing things because we've set up more objective, more ambitious goals, and we've realized that some of the things that we're doing are not really getting us there. So there's going to be design sprints and innovation sessions, and we're going to have to figure out how to resource all these new initiatives. So we'll have a different program to get it done. And then once we've done that, then we need to go back to the discipline of the OKR model, which is a unique way of tracking the progress towards these key results, understanding what's working and what's not working right when it's happening and iterating, and very clearly celebrating success or providing support if things are not going well. So we get that flow, and obviously there's going to be times where we'll have to reassess and realign, but this is the back and forth that I've seen tends to happen naturally when you put these two frameworks together. So let me just pause here for a second and Susan, see if anybody has any questions, or you can shout them out too if you want.
All quiet on the chat so far, but we would love to hear from anyone who has questions.
I'm just going to assume that we're clear as Monday. Okay, thanks, Cheryl. Okay, so this is our plan. Now, for those of you who said I'm a 2, I'm a 1, I'm a 4, and Heather, you can correct me when I talk about the design thinking stuff. I just want to touch on what these 2 frameworks are so that we can get our language and understanding at more or less a consistent place. So let's start with design thinking. Now, lots of ways to look this up. Google it, ChatGPT, and there's so many descriptions and definitions of design thinking. This is what works for me. I see it as a framework for innovation. Innovation is important here because design thinking is almost the codification of how innovators naturally think and work. So for those of us who were not born innovators, we're all creative, but some of us are more innovative than others. For those of us who actually need a little bit of structure about how to innovate, design thinking is our go-to toolkit. And the reason why is because it brings human-centered creativity. And what I mean by that, and you'll see this in our session, is that we're thinking about who we're designing for, and we're working with our colleagues in a very human-centered way to be creative and come up with solutions. And like I said earlier, we're using it for complex problem solving. We're using it when we're stumped. And just yesterday, I was talking to a client about all the challenges that she's having and what are the biggest barriers in our organization. And every time she mentioned something, I could see a design thinking workshop that could help her and her colleagues stop talking past each other and actually get into it without the usual tension that you have in a meeting. So complex problems, not just fancy new products, but organizational challenges and any other types of challenges that we see. And it comes together as a result of, in my experience, understanding the framework, recognizing that we're showing up in a different way with different mindsets, but almost more importantly, knowing how to do it, actually knowing the methods. So just to touch on these for a minute, this particular image or these words might be familiar to the 2s, 3s, 4s out there who know something. Oh, that's that empathize thing, right? And isn't there always a ton of prototyping or something, right? This is a framework rather than a process, because sometimes you come in at different places. But ideally, what design thinking is telling us is if you're going to change something, make sure you understand it deeply first. Many leaders feel like they need to know the answer in the first 5 minutes. Design thinking gives them the excuse to stop and think and go deep first in a productive way. So when I tell people we need to do an understand phase, they roll their eyes and, well, I haven't got 6 months to do understand. And I'll say, I only need 2 weeks, actually, with about 6 hours of time from these people. So we can be very efficient in how we do this work, but we need to understand first by empathizing and defining the challenge. And if you're looking at the shapes, it's because another core element of design thinking is the ability through methods to look at a lot of information, whether it's in the understand phase or the create phase, to diverge is the word design thinkers use, and to very quickly converge or come together on the ones that matter most or make the most or have the most impact. So we're seeing these diamond shapes. It's taking us from this empathize, etc., all the way through to ideating, coming up with lots of ideas, and then de-risking the execution by prototyping and testing first. Motherhood and apple pie again, and something nobody ever told me when I was going through my earlier consulting career and professional career in industry. So a very helpful framework. Working in this way and thinking in this way helps us show up in a different way at work. Again, I'm dating myself, but being very empathetic and imaginative and questioning, not the way I was brought up, honestly, when it comes to showing up in a corporate situation with your PowerPoint, with the solution, not really the jam. But when we're working in this way, we know that to get the types of results that we need, we have to shed all of that at the door and show up differently. And the way that we show up differently, we can talk about this until we're purple, but the way that we show up differently is by investing in the capabilities and mastering the methods. All of this goodness happens when people in the room know how to make it happen by bringing in the right methods and techniques. What you're looking, the eye chart in front of you is actually from the Luma Institute, where I'm an instructor. I know Heather just finished a whole bunch of her certifications. This is a school for design thinkers and people in industry who are trying to learn how to do this so that we can equip ourselves with 36 of the very strongest methods out there. Of course, there's thousands of methods and many other methods, but this is a good starting point. And this is what we use at Salt Collaboratory and what we integrate into our training programs. So this is where we start. But that framework, those mindsets and those methods create a design thinking capability that is somewhat magical, as some of you who've used it may have seen. Great. What about this whole OKR thing that we keep talking about, the purple stuff? So OKRs, they're going to provide a clear framework for setting ambitious goals and aligning efforts towards measurable outcomes. Now, if you think about this chart, if you look at objectives and key results, they're at the bottom of the pyramid, because what this is telling us is you don't do them in isolation, right? You have to do your objectives and key results in a way that supports the strategy, mission, and vision of your organization. So that requires you and your teams to understand that strategy, vision, and mission. And that's why we see such a big increase in the percentages of people who are working with OKRs in terms of how well they understand their company vision, mission. They have to. They can't work in isolation from it. So we know what those are all about. Objectives and key results are going to help us actually bridge that execution gap. So what are they? Objectives are going to answer the question of where do I need to go? They're statements that inspire and set direction. They're aspirational. So if you're going on a trip, for example, the easiest metaphor is I need to get to New York. That is my big goal that I'm trying to get to. That's going to be my objective. Your key results are going to be, how do I know I'm getting there? I will have done 100 miles a day for however many days. I will have organized my stops along the way. I will have taken care of the plan to get me to that destination in a way that I can clearly measure progress. And I'll tell you that objectives and key results come out of the brain of Andy Grove from Intel. And he was the one who came up with this idea. And there's some video of him explaining it in his very thick accent. And basically what he says is, I need to be able to say, did I get there or did I not get there? Yes, no, simple. Don't overcomplicate it. We need to be able to know whether we're making the progress we say we're trying to make. And then all of that is good and well, but I actually have to have the wherewithal and the initiatives to get me there. I have to have the car and I have to have the gas and I have to have people who know that I'm coming or whatever it is in place so that this journey will be successful. So those are the key elements of the objectives and key results model. And it's almost equally as important to understand what OKRs are not. They're not performance measurement tools. And this is top of the list because if the people creating the OKRs are worried about whether they're going to be able to do them, otherwise they will be critiqued in their performance review, they won't set ambitious goals. So performance management and how people are getting their bonuses and all of that, separate conversation from working together as a team to set ambitious objectives and key results. This is not about having a to-do list, right? It's not about busy work. It's about really emphasizing outcomes. Sure, thinking about initiatives, but keeping an eye on the ball on the outcomes. It's not KPIs. A lot of people get confused with this. KPIs, and you think about a driving metaphor, might be how much gas do we have in the tank, and where's the oil, and what's the heat? These are things that are indicators that we're doing okay. These are not them. They're also not static. We're not going to do them once and move on. If we do that, they don't work. So when we design OKRs, we typically sometimes we think about the full year because we're used to planning that way, but the actual OKRs that we work towards are usually in 90-day cycles, because that's where you can feel the pressure of, okay, I've got 90 days. I can maybe breathe today, but I can't relax forever because I have a lot of work to do. And I'm going to be tracking my progress all the way through. And almost most importantly, that we'll see in the case study, they are not top-down mandates. These are collaboratively designed by the people who are going to achieve them. And this goes a long way towards changing the dynamic about having low motivation and being disengaged. So this is the corrective work that we're going to be doing there. So that's fly through of design thinking and OKRs. Want to check if there are any questions before we jump into our case study. Tell me if you're seeing anything, Susan. Okay, I'm going to keep rolling then. Let's look at a case study. So this is very fresh. In fact, I was just at the client yesterday. This is a Regional Children's Hospital Foundation. And the leader of this particular part of the fundraising enterprise had some significant challenges. She was one of those relatively new leaders. She had inherited some teams, and she noticed that they were doing a lot of reactive work. Some people had been in these careers pretty much their whole lives. They were doing the same thing year after year, not really moving the needle, working super hard. So she was interested in shifting these teams from all these reactive things to a more proactive approach and getting some higher impact work, because she believed that she and her team could raise a lot more money for these children than they were currently doing. Something that some of you brought up earlier around team alignment and efficiency. So lots of people bumping into each other and people thinking they're accountable for things, and, something happening and everybody's swarming around the challenge. So she was looking to clarify her team roles and improve collaboration between her teams. And she really was looking for this doubling of productivity. She was going to hit what she was after. The other thing was, somebody else brought this up about prioritizing work, because some of the work would take a ton of effort and only yield this incremental result. So she wanted to make sure things were prioritized. And finally, last but absolutely not least, was she had inherited these leaders who really hadn't been invested in for a long time. And as a result, they had limited capabilities in their own management skills and toolkits. So she wanted to elevate their capabilities so that they too could bring their own teams higher into doing this work in a better way. So lots of stuff that she wanted to work on that I happen to think PeakForm could be helpful with. And so we did it. We actually have, in this webinar, I'm going to cover steps 1 and 2. So a little bit of design thinking examples and some OKR examples. And in our next webinar, which will be in November, we'll talk about 3 and 4, about how we actually managed to get that execution going and start mapping how things are going in the program. I'm taking you behind the curtain into my thinking and my approach to these things. When I'm in that first align on aspirations box in the model, I know that I'm going to be reaching into my design thinking toolkit based on those Luma 36 methods. And I'm probably going to use some sort of combination of these 6 methods. I may use some different ones, but these tend to be my go-tos when it comes to getting people into alignment. What are they? The first one is stakeholder mapping. And I won't get into the specifics of the tool, but it's more than just your org chart. It's really good thinking about who needs to be in what room for these conversations and whose input is needed. And it requires a deeper set of exercises to think about who touches what, when, why, and how. So we always start there to make sure we're not skipping a whole group of people who need to be in the conversation. And then depending on the particular circumstance, we reach for methods that map to that circumstance. So in this particular case, this is a fundraising organization. They have goals. They're very clearly articulated. It's all about how much money they raise, how many donors they retain. They were not missing that part of it. So they'd known what their goals were for a long time. We didn't need to ask them to start to create new goals immediately, but we did need to understand why they were so stuck. And so that's why we started with the rose thorn vine method, which I'll tell you about a little bit more. All the way through, when you see sticky notes behind me or on this board or on my desk or anywhere, anytime you write a sticky note, it's useful in its individual capacity, but it's far more useful when it's grouped with other people's thinking. And so you will always see this pattern finding in design thinking that we call affinity clustering. So that one's going to be everywhere all the time. And every now and again, we do the snap voting and assessing where the heat is in the room using a voting mechanism called visualize the vote. But for this first, let's just get out of the gate. Let's not overwhelm anybody. Let's be sensitive to where this team is at. Introduce PeakForm, design thinking, OKRs, but really start to get to what's troubling this team and what's holding them back. The first workshop that we did was with a select number of stakeholders. It wasn't the full team. It was the team lead. It was some leadership. A few other coordinators were in the session. And after explaining what we were up to and trying to measure the temperature in the room so we didn't freak anybody out, honestly, I asked them a question and I gave them each, as you can see, because this was an in-person workshop and knowing how to do this in person versus remotely is another important factor in doing this. But doing it in person, we want everybody to be well set up with a Sharpie and their little sticky notes. And we asked them a very simple question. You've been working on these objectives for a long time. We've been trying to raise money, work together for a long time. What's working for you across your teams? Give me 3 pink roses, make you feel rosy. What's not working for you? What's making you feel blue? Give me 3 of those. Those are the thorns. And you've probably seen some examples or some opportunities for improvement. Give me those too. Those are the buds like spring. And for about 10 minutes, because that's all it really takes, everybody sits quietly in their own zone, writing down what they think. People don't tend to work in meetings. They talk in meetings. So when you give people quiet time in a meeting to actually do work, it's amazing how insightful and productive they'll be. And everybody does it. We don't get anybody pushing back from the table. I'm not participating in this. This isn't for me. We're going to get everybody's opinion. And then we facilitate the bringing together of these insights and experiences into themes. And we cluster them and we label them. And eventually we even pull out the insights. So without going into too much zooming in and out, you can even see from this group that things like goal clarity was a little bit of a mixed bag. Some roses, some thorns. Things like, I have to go see if I can even read my own handwriting. The point is, here's a good one, because this always looks like this in the organization. The process one, people talking about process, invariably, mostly blue, little bit of green, tiny bit of pink. So what you're seeing is that each of these themes is going to tell us a lot about the actual data on each of the specific sticky notes. But even more than that, it's going to give us from the colors a sense of whether things are going well in that theme or not. So that's the story here. And we learned a lot from that. And when I asked for feedback, I just want to share a few things that this group was saying very early on. I love seeing the themes come together on the whiteboard, so many great perspectives, starting to work differently together. I learned that objectives are bigger and more aspirational. I wish we could do this with the leadership team with more team members. That's the first workshop. Then we kept going. So I'm going to zip through these a little bit. Now we're in setting strategic direction. We've learned from that first workshop what we need to think about. and what needs to be on our radar for that strategic direction. Now we're putting together the leads of the team to set the objectives and key results for their group going forward. So this was a smaller meeting, and we used methods like Rose thought about again, affinity clustering, visualize the vote, but we're really directing it much more at the OKR work. So here we see the leads of the team thinking about what the key pillars of the organization are, going back up to that vision, mission, strategy. They're all about philanthropy, donor, volunteer experience, etc. And these leads, 3 or 4 of them, spent 2 hours really digging deep to think about the aspirations that they want to set, the objectives and the key results for their overall annual giving team. They weren't even thinking about their own teams. They were just saying, when the 3 of us or 4 of us come together, what do we need to be achieving? And they came up with things they never thought they would have put on a list before. They were excited about this new thinking. And they started to do a little bit of voting. You can see the little dots here, so that they could see where they were gravitating. But they came out of this with their own objectives and key results at the team leader level. And then they brought a team together for their leadership retreat with the donuts. And they said to them, if you look on the left-hand side, we have done some work. We have set objectives and key results for our overall team. In this meeting, you're going to go with your team manager, with 2 different teams working in this group. You're going to interpret those objectives and key results, and you're going to set objectives and key results for your own team. You're going to cascade them down. So you can imagine, and we're now seeing the whites of the eyes of people never being asked to do this before. Don't really even know where to start. So to warm them up, we started with a what's on your radar exercise to get them thinking and in the groove of articulating what they care about, so that each of the leaders could make sure that they're paying attention to the needs of their team. But then they spent their time coming up with their objectives and key results. And watch what they said after the meeting. I circled a lot of them here. They said, I liked the support my team showed me. I liked the collective goal setting, the ability to have bottom-up input on our priorities, hearing ideas from the whole team, right? This is a new way of thinking and working. They've never been in a session like this before. What did I learn? I'm smarter than I think. And I know where this comes from. This is somebody who was really struggling. And I said to her, just write something down. Write down what you think it should be. And she did. And everybody voted for hers. So there's a lot of human experience happening in this room. There's a shift from that misaligned, I feel alone, I'm overworked, to I'm starting to feel motivated. I learned that having inspirational North Star objective will make our work more meaningful to that purpose question. I learned we can have aggressive goals. Who knew we could really push? That's awesome. I learned there's a lot of overlap between what we do. I wish we knew this work would be supported from the higher level, right? Sometimes this work starts with a particular group and not the top of the organization. And closing that gap is important. Personally, I like to show, not tell. Let's show the value, and then we'll get the support that we need. I want to keep the process going. I wish we do that. Always, I wish we had more. So very productive, already starting to see the shift in the team and how they think. The next exercise is an eye chart done remotely, where we actually took all the team objectives and all the key results, and we took all their toys and threw them up in the air. We said, everybody tell us every project you're doing. Let's see how they map to the objectives and key results. And the reason why you're seeing it twice is because the first pass was the leaders only, with the colors showing the work of each individual person. But then I say to them, if you're going to do it as a group, take the colors out. Take that feeling of my project versus your project out, and let's just put the projects where they belong. Sometimes they're duplicated. And if you've got good eyes, you can see that there are dots here where we marked whether each of those initiatives were red, amber, or green. To what extent were they really going to help achieve that key result? Because we need this information for the next phase, which is, okay, we've mapped the initiatives to the key result. Now we've got to get ready to innovate and execute. How ready are we to achieve these results? What are we missing? Which of these initiatives need to be rethought and taken up to the next level? Because all of this work that we're doing, if we don't change anything, we're not going to get a different result. So how do we get more innovative? And in parallel, working with their project manager to make sure that we're ready to measure and not tax the system too much and integrate with other ways that they're tracking results, etc. But this is our next piece that we're working on. And I'm going to be excited to tell you all about it in about 2 months' time in November. But this team is doing really so much so that I got a client recommendation. And I got it and I found out about it because my client copied me on a note to one of her colleagues where she suggested that we chat. And I think what she said is very important here. She said they started doing this a few months ago. They wanted to rethink and significantly accelerate their fundraising. As you might imagine, it's both scary and very invigorating. This is a relatively recently promoted person who's coming in with something very different with the support of her lead, but you don't really know where it's going to go if you haven't done it before and you don't really know your team. So she had a lot of courage to do it, but she and the team have found it very invigorating, particularly for the teams who feel like they've been stuck on the hamster wheel of reactive work. And like I said to you earlier, she had a lot of that. And the other thing she put in, which I shared, is that they love working with us because their leads are expanding the skill set of the team members. They're actually, like, nobody really taught them ways to integrate the input of their team. Rose thought, but just wasn't a thing. So we're excited that the client is excited because it helps us keep going with the work that we want to do.
Yes, you do have a question. Vershu asks, how did the teams leverage what had been done by the leaders in that exercise?
So that's a great question, Vershu. I want to say none of this work is easy, right? It takes deep thinking. So without going to specifics, the leaders had started to articulate things like they're raising all this money, but their overall objective is to be the number one charity for the region around the hospital. They're like, these are children, for heaven's sake. We should be the number one charity that people donate to. And they pushed up their fundraising levels beyond what's in their budget because they believe that they can do more. That meant that their team had to look at those objectives and decide whether they're just keeping that one or translating it. But more than that, they had to decide how much financial contribution their work was going to make to the 15 million or whatever it was. Looking at it at the overall level is the first step. And this is in large organizations like Google and others that do this all the time. It starts with the board and the C-suite, and they articulate the objectives and the key results for the organization. And then it cascades down with each organizational department looking one step above and saying, oh, you said you're going to do that. This is how I'm going to contribute to that. This is what gets me excited. They're still doing their day-to-day work, but in terms of pushing the organization forward, marketing people will say, I'm going to get involved in this key result that you articulated. The finance people will get involved in a different key result. But the trick here is to have 3 to 5, not 50. So it's a very contained, focused push to move things forward. Does that help?
Yep. And
Thanks.
Go ahead.
I can see Gwen's question. Example that starts with a KPI and then flows into an OKR. It's a great question, Gwen, and I haven't necessarily seen that, but I imagine if I'm thinking about that dashboard of the car with the gas tank thing. So I'm guessing that if there were a KPI that was struggling a lot and the gas tank was always low and we didn't know why, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some sort of alignment, questioning, deep thinking work that went into, wait a second, what's going on there? Oh, we need to build a new guest tag. We didn't realize that. Let's set an objective to build that and get this far this quickly so that we fix that broken KPI. That's how I might see the connection between the two, if that makes sense. Yep. Okay, great.
And
Well,
Deanna, one last question. Do you have a quick, how can I convince my leaders that we should do this?
I don't think that's quick, honestly. I say that because I was in a conversation for an hour and a half yesterday with my client's lead, who's going to have to convince the head of this whole research foundation that they need to do it. The problem with some leaders, not all leaders, in this particular case, is there was an expectation that managers know how to do this. Doesn't everybody know how to do this? Don't you know how to set your objectives and be creative, for heaven's sake? That's leadership 101. What we really need are the leaders who understand and recognize that, yes, and there are better ways to work. And the ways that we are working right now may be a little bit dated. And maybe part of the reason why things are not going well is because, sadly, the leaders who are running these teams actually don't know how to do it. You expect them to, but they don't know. So are you going to bang your head against the wall, or are you going to help them? And if you're going to help them, you've got options. You can send them to training and then have them translate that training into their work. Or you can work in this way where you're actually showing and telling at the same time. You're learning and doing and creating the results at the same time, which is my preference, personally. We can teach this in a classroom for sure, but this team I'm working with is getting more out of it because they're actually experiencing the impact. So they're far more sold on it than if I was teaching them in the classroom.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The one thing I want to tell you is that there's a little bonus in this for everybody who decides that this is worth doing. And that bonus comes from the fact that we live in a different world. Anybody hear me say anything about AI up until now? Isn't it nice to be on vacation from AI for a minute? And it's everywhere, right? And what the studies are showing is that we better all upskill, frankly, if we're going to be competitive and relevant to all of that. And absolutely in the light green bubbles, we better know data analysis and prompt engineering and information research and all those things that we love so much. But at the same time, if we don't up our human-centered skills, we're not in the game anymore. And when I think about what they're pointing out in those human-centered skills, critical thinking, that should be further back. Creativity, resilience, all of that, those are our design thinking and OKR capabilities that are flowing into communication. OKRs are fabulous for communication, emotional intelligence, thinking, design thinking, etc. So for people who are trying to convince their leaders that this is important, you can bring this up too. Look at the Deloitte study. I'm happy to share it with people if they're interested. All right, I know we're almost at time. Thank you, everybody. What I do want to say, though, is that if this is resonating with anybody, if you're starting to think about what this could look like for your team, I want to respect the fact that you've spent all this time with me today. And I want to spend time with you on a call to help you think about how this could work in your circumstance, how this could be customized for you. So what we would be talking about, first of all, is you. What's happening in your situation? What prompted your interest in the call? Is it misalignment? Is it productivity? Is it all those things you said earlier, prioritization, etc.? Because every story is different. And then we would talk about, okay, you saw how it worked in this situation. How would we customize that for your group? Maybe we can't start at Rosethorn, but maybe we have to do a what's on your radar or something different, right? Who would we include? How could we, is this the right thing to help you get more productive? And the 90-day thing is real for me, for the clients who have invested in the program upfront, who've said, I see the value, I'm going to clear the decks. Let's not stretch this out over a year. Let's get this work done so everybody's being more productive. And then we would learn about also where and how OKRs and design thinking can fit into it for you. At the end of the call, you would have, give it a blueprint of what it could look like in your organization. And so if you're thinking about why would I even do this, first of all, I just want to do it for you. I can't do it for everybody. The other thing is that all of these things that I haven't spoken about, other case studies, you can speak about this particular one, but on my LinkedIn site and on my nascent YouTube channel are other case studies of exactly this with other organizations showing the impact on strategy. Delta Devil in Seattle is a big example of how they integrated this into everything they do. And those of you who know me know that I just like to talk and have fun. There's no pressure or anything. We would just see if it was interesting to you. So if you're a leader who's struggling with the stuff, if any of you are in new roles or thinking about new roles and want to have some impact, or if you just know that this is something that could be missing, we should talk. The other thing that I did promise for this webinar is that I would give you some of those tools and methods. And so in a minute, Susan, thank you. You're going to put in the chat a link to how to do rows, pullback, and affinity clustering with your team. But if we got on the call and we decided you might need to do what's on your radar or a different method, I would make sure that you can look and learn and start to understand those methods as well. So I'm hoping that we get to talk more, specifically those of you who might have a need for this. Susan, if you can just put the link into Book a Call in the chat, that would be great as well.
Yes, it is in there.
Oh, beautiful. And if anybody is telling me they want to do it, that would be good to know. But otherwise, I just want to make sure that hopefully you've gotten something good and interesting out of the conversation. You can tell me in the chat what you learned, you liked, you loved, you wish you would have heard. Those are all interesting and helpful feedback for me if we do this again. But mostly, since we're a minute over, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to all of you for coming and for sticking with us right until the end. I'm very happy to stay on and say hello to friends or answer questions, but just wanted to say a huge thank you. And again, if you're looking for more stuff about SALT or about me, we have our website. You can always email me. And with that, thank you.